The following program is being presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.
Welcome to Common Sense. The Common Sense program is a series of shows that feature interviews with interesting people so that we can get to know them in a clear, concise, and direct way, who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing Chief of Police Jack Hall, who's also a candidate for Sheriff of Lorain County in 2022.
24.
I'm sorry, in 2024. The first thing I usually start off with is for folks to give me where they were born, what cities they've lived in, and what brings them to this part of Ohio.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Rudy. Kind of came here in not the most usual way, not to make reference to a Cat Stevens song or anything,
okay.
But was actually born at the Cold War time, West Germany, when it was actually divided. My father was in the United States Air Force. So I was born in Wiesbaden, stayed in Germany nearly a year,
okay,
and then moved here to the United States, and my family settled in Lorain. My grandparents have been in Lorain County for a while. My grandmother was in Sheffield Lake at that time, moved here to Avon Lake. And eventually, when I was 6 years old, we moved to Amherst. Mm-hmm. And except for a short stint in Bowling Green when I attended the university out there, I've been a Lorain County resident my entire life and currently reside in Columbia Station.
Oh, okay. Why did you decide to become a police officer?
Well, when I was in college, I was doing an internship with a public relations firm downtown Cleveland.
Okay.
And every day I went into work, you'd get there about 7:30 or so, and everybody was updating their resume every single day.
Okay.
And so finally, I pulled aside my mentor who was assigned to me at college, and I said, Buzz, I said, why is everybody updating their resume every single morning? And he said, Jack, we lose one major account. We don't know if we're going to have a job the next day or not. And I thought, wow, not
pretty
a lot
uncertain.
Yeah, no stability, pretty uncertain. In the meantime, one of my best friends was doing an internship with the Lorain County Sheriff's Office at the time. So we would come home after work, compare notes as to what I did, working on some advertising campaigns. He was chasing bad guys, and I thought, wow, your day is way more exciting than
really
mine
interesting,
is.
Yeah.
So later on, I decided to join the auxiliary for the Sheffield Police Department, and that's where I got my start. And going through that program, I was really intrigued, helping people out, some excitement in the job, and so therefore, to the dismay of my family, I became a police officer.
That was the next question I was going to ask you. How did your family feel about that?
Oh, they were not thrilled. And it was, if you're going to call any time in policing safer, it was safer or less controversial then than it is now.
Yeah.
My parents absolutely despised the fact that all this money was spent on college. You went to get a degree in journalism and psychology, and here you became a police officer. Why? And kind of followed my dad's footsteps because he served the country in the United States Air Force. Then he went on to work for the Cleveland Federal Air Traffic Control Center in Oberlin.
Okay.
So he was always in public service. And I just always felt there was a higher calling in public service than there was working for the private sector. So that's what got me attracted to it. But my family absolutely was not for it at all.
It was a little beyond interesting for them.
Exactly, right.
Now, you started your career in local law enforcement. but then eventually you became captain of the Special Operations Division of the Cleveland Metroparks Police Force. Could you tell us a little bit about the different Metroparks units that you had responsibility for in that job?
I had what was called the fun side of the house.
Oh.
And so the laboratory services were underneath my command, dispatch, the detectives, the canines, watercraft enforcement, the mounted unit. All of those services came underneath special operations. And with that, the Cleveland Metroparks was, at that time, 23,000 acres spread over 6 counties in northeastern Ohio.
Wow.
Primarily Cuyahoga, but Lorain, Medina, Summit, Lake, and Cuyahoga as well. And so therefore, with all of that in mind, my unit, which was overall smaller because the patrol division was much larger than we were, but we conducted all the investigations, the special operations, all the details.
For all that area?
For the entire area. And
Wow.
so that was a lot of collaborating with 96 different agencies in that area that we worked with on any regular basis.
Well, now, if you could, what is a typical day? I know there are probably no typical days,
Right.
but there are certain common elements that you had when you had this responsibility.
Typical days normally resulted in looking at all the information that came over the weekend or during the week. We were very statistically driven in regards to where resources were going to be allocated in response to any type of criminal activity. So we met regularly every day to look at that, what the status of our investigations were. Fortunately, our prosecutors were in the building with us. A lot of people don't realize this, but a Metropolitan Park District in Ohio is its own separate political subdivision. So we had our own prosecutors. We had our own representation in court. So therefore, except for felonies that went to the county prosecutor's office, we conferred regularly with the 17 municipal courts that we dealt with across Northeast Ohio. So that prosecutor, our detectives, officers, all of the tickets, citations, cases, that was 17 municipal courts, 6 county courts of common pleas, and 6 juvenile courts that we had to deal with every day.
It certainly sounds complicated. Tell us about your involvement with the training of police officers at the Public Safety Training Center at Cuyahoga Community College.
Well, when I was working with the Cleveland Metroparks Police Department, I had an opportunity to pair up with the Public Safety Center at Tri-C. And I was an academy instructor for many, many years.
Okay.
And that even began before I was with the Cleveland Metroparks Police Department. When we went over to Tri-C, worked in the academy, Tri-C was starting to do a push on more advanced type training for officers. And a little ahead of their time, because even back then they were looking at de-escalation, they were looking at scenario-based training, they were looking at things from also a technology point of view. Closed circuit television, internet crimes against children, and how to set up cases involving people who were searching for child pornography, people unfortunately looking to have sex with minors. Mm-hmm. And so therefore we set those classes up, did training at Tri-C, and taught many officers across the Northeast Ohio area, not only from a basic academy sense, but also from an advanced development structure for instruction as well. So,
understand. Tell us about your involvement with the planning of the Republican convention.
That was a lot of fun. Actually, that was at the tail end of my career before moving to Medina County, where I am now. But with the Republican National Convention, I actually have to take us back a couple years before that, because the foundation for the security of the RNC started with the 9th International Gay Games when they were announced that they were coming to Cleveland. Since many of the venues were going to be within Cleveland Metroparks for the events that were taking place, we worked regularly with the FBI, the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office, the Cleveland Police Department in the gay game situation that also included Summit County, due to the fact is that when the games were sponsored, they were sponsored by both Cleveland and Akron, which gave rise to a whole other security problem of athletes traversing back and forth on 77, multiple venues, 2 different counties, and all of that we had to plan.
Complex.
It was extremely complex. And then in that planning, we were looking at all the different reports from different locations, Paris, New York, San Francisco, and we were looking at all of the incidences that had taken place, and we were like, what did we sign up for when we did this?
Yeah.
So at the end, I think if I recall the night of the closing ceremonies, we had 3 total incidences that happened the entire time while the gay games were in Cleveland.
Good record.
So it was a great record. We congratulated ourselves and said, now that that worked so well, let's take that foundation and move it to the Republican National Convention. And it was a great format, planning for all of that. The weirdest thing I remembered was during the RNC, and I had actually left Metroparks at that time. I was with my new job, but our CEO was at the convention. So I was downtown Cleveland.
Okay.
We were on Public Square, a couple hundred police officers on Public Square, and this is when Donald Trump was doing his acceptance speech. And we thought, well, this is the moment. This is when something bad could possibly happen. It was a very surreal experience because I remember standing on Public Square. Everybody had moved out. We're traveling to Philadelphia to the Democratic National Convention, and it was the oddest thing. It was like 9 or 10 families with their kids playing by the fountains and in Public Square, protected by at least 100 some police officers that were there. And I thought that was the safest place on the planet at that point in time. But at the time when you were expecting the worst to happen, it was just a surreal calm that had come over everybody. All of the protesting, all of any type of attempted acts of violence or whatever that had taken place that week had just all dissipated and went away. So it was a very surreal experience.
Tell us about the sheriffs in Ohio. What are their duties, their terms of office? I don't think everyone understands, this police force.
Well, the sheriffs in Ohio, there's 88 counties. There are 87 elected sheriffs. Cuyahoga County is the only county at this time that appoints their sheriff. The sheriff is not elected. But in all the other 87 counties, the sheriff is elected for a term of 4 years. The sheriff is the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the county and answers, instead of to politicians, any other type of faction, a safety director, they answer directly to the people. And so therefore, when you look at a sheriff's office, the sheriff's office is one of your purest forms of law enforcement because the people decide who they want in the office or who they don't want in the office. So the particular responsibilities of that, of not only being the chief law enforcement officer, they're responsible for all the court process for the Court of Common Pleas, operating the county jail, little known things such as all the sheriff sales that take place, disposition of property, and all of that the sheriff's office also has to be responsible for. In the unincorporated areas of the county, they will provide road patrol duties in the unincorporated areas. And with the size of Lorain County being the 9th largest county in the state of Ohio, also provide a lot of assistance through task force support, et cetera, to the local police departments in the county.
There's a lot of cooperation.
A lot of cooperation, yes. Yeah, there has to be. A lot of times you look at some cities that don't have the ability or resources to do certain things. And so therefore, with the county being central as it is, those resources can be centralized and then utilized to help out villages and cities that don't have the resources to be able to investigate those crimes or to service the public.
Understand. Switch gears a little bit. Tell us about the crime of human trafficking.
I say that with a little bit of disdain because to me it's a very disturbing crime which has taken place because I think it's the worst of everything that gets combined into one criminal act. The crime of human trafficking is an involuntary servitude of one to another. Now, a lot of times there's a lot of focus on sex trafficking. We see that because sex workers, either voluntary or involuntary, have some type of affiliation to human trafficking. And there's also labor trafficking as well, in which people are brought over from other countries, are working off some type of contract that they have with their handler, placed in conditions of, either unsanitary living conditions, whatever is the least expensive thing because their handler is looking to make a profit. The sad thing is, too, is that a lot of these organizations are interconnected, not even locally, but nationally. And Ohio, unfortunately, ranks 4th in the nation for the amount of human trafficking cases. And those are only the cases that are reported that we know of to the human trafficking hotline or are investigated by law enforcement. And unfortunately, we had a situation a couple weeks ago in which a subject had abducted a 16-year-old girl from North Carolina, brought her up to Ohio. We still right now don't know exactly where he was bringing her to or what was going on, but they were coming south on Interstate 75 from the Cincinnati area going into Kentucky. Now, the girl that was abducted at 16 years old, she was doing a hand signal that she had learned on TikTok, which she had held her hand up, all four hands or fingers in her hand in an upright position. Her thumb would come over to her palm, and then she would come down. So it would be this and come down. This and come down.
Right.
She kept doing this all the way down Interstate 75 until somebody recognized the hand signal and called 911. So a sheriff's office in Kentucky had set up a roadblock and had stopped the vehicle. She was rescued, reunited with her parents back in North Carolina, and he was arrested. But again, we're coming down to this situation, why Ohio again? And we know because we have a vast interstate network. You look at cities, a few states are like Ohio, where you have large cities like Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Akron, Youngstown, Toledo, in this corridor that goes up 75 through Detroit into Canada, where it crosses over into Windsor. And so unfortunately, it's one of those situations that not only is it an unbelievably heinous crime, it also has a vast network of support from people who engage in this activity as well.
Okay. That's incredible what that girl did to save herself.
Yes, and learned it on TikTok. So sometimes social media isn't always bad.
It helps sometimes. What are the multiple challenges facing victims of trafficking?
Oh, wow. We just had a symposium on this, a town hall meeting that my campaign had sponsored. And we did the first one in Lorain a couple Saturdays ago at the Lorain Palace Theater.
Okay.
We had 6 panelists. 4 of the panelists had all been survivors of human trafficking. We had a task force commander from Greene, Ohio, and also a psychiatrist who specializes in PTSD and the trauma, and especially the trauma that human trafficking victims go through. The problem is, in each of these cases, which is very common to many victims in human trafficking, there's a high trust factor, either in their abductor or their handler. So unlike what a lot of people think when they see the movie Taken or something else like that, a lot of these situations are not stealing a child from someplace, abducting them and taking off.
A lot of force involved,
right,
and violence.
Although there are a few are. We had one recently we were made aware of that the victim was recovered in Mansfield, Ohio, and it was based on an arrest for prostitution and drugs. When they took her to the Richland County Jail and ran her fingerprints, it came up that she was deceased or missing from Katrina in New Orleans, Louisiana. And what happened was she and 15 other girls were abducted during the natural disaster that had taken place. Her families, or all their families, had assumed that they had perished down there. And then years later, the family finally gets a call after psychologists on both ends of the transaction, the family end and the victims end in Mansfield, started raising the issue of, we found your daughter and how do we bring and reunite everybody back together. Those are the rarer situations that happens, but mainly they know their abductor. In the situations of our panel, one of ours was engaged to her abductor. One was Dr. Marlene Carson. She's on the White House Advisory Council for Human Trafficking. Was appointed by President Trump, kept on by President Biden. She was abducted when she was 15 years old. And this started by a trusted family in the neighborhood that, hey, we're going to take the kids to the zoo, the Columbus Zoo. She was originally from Columbus.
Okay.
They took the kids to the zoo. The next trip was to Kings Island. They took the kids to Kings Island. Every trip started getting a little bit further away to establish the trust. And this was a church family that was doing this. So everybody in the neighborhood thought, well, we can trust the kids with them. So the next big story came up, hey, we're taking the kids to New York. And they're like, and Dr. Carson's mom was like, no, you're not going to New York. And so, you know, you're 15, 16 years old at the time. It's like, oh, come on, Mom, everybody else is going, we're going on this trip. So as predators do, they look for moments of opportunity. Dr. Carson's aunt was in a very bad car accident. And at that moment, they decided they were going to ask your mom now if you can go to New York. Dr. Carson asks her mom if she can go to New York, and finally, all right, you can go.
Yeah.
So she and a few other young ladies, they get into this van, they head up to New York City. So they get to the apartment because they're going to a Broadway show that night. So each of the girls has their own room, and they thought, well, this is odd. I'm not bunking up with so-and-so, or how are we all staying? They got to their rooms, and their handlers, these neighbors, took them into the room, and they had their dresses and their lingerie laid out in the hotel rooms. And Dr. Carson said that she was sold 27 times that night.
Oh,
Another one of our
terrible.
victims worked for a florist. And one night when she was working for the florist, she went to leave the shop. There was a lock on the door that was a keyed deadbolt, so she didn't have the key to get out. Unfortunately, she was abused at home by her mother, her father, and her brother, and the shop owner abused her as well. And unfortunately, this victim told everybody on stage when we were at the Lorraine Palace Theater, she said, I know what I experienced at home through sexual abuse, but she goes, at least I was getting paid for it at the florist shop. She then recruited other young girls to come and work in the florist shop as well, saying it may not be great at home and this may not be fun, but at least you're getting paid, and you're getting paid very well. She recruited several other young girls to come and work at the florist shop too. The florist shop owner was also a pastor of a local church. That there was trust there from the family. Okay, you can go work for Pastor so-and-so because we're supposed to trust our, clergy in this particular situation. So we've had neighbors, we've had shop owners that were clergy members, we've had fiancés that we were married to. So in many of these cases, it's not one of these situations that you're expecting your child to be abducted from someplace. It's somebody they trust. And the other thing that parents have to watch out for too is, long as we're talking about the topic and throwing out suggestions for parents who may be watching this show, watch your children's friends, and especially their new friends. If you start seeing things like, hey, where did you get that expensive coat? Oh, Bobby, bought it for me. Or Jenny's parents got me for this. Believe it or not, parents, as sick as this is going to sound, will use their own children sometimes to recruit other kids to get into trafficking. Be careful for the new families that have just moved in, and all of a sudden your child is being bought gaming consoles, expensive gifts, and things like this. It's what we call grooming in the industry, to get this child interested in and to show faith towards and dedication and loyalty to their trafficker. And many times they'll use their own kids to do this as well. And that's come up in several cases.
Terrible situation. What specific laws are typically broken by the traffickers?
It's a variety of things, Rudy. I mean, coming down from sexual assault, rape, kidnapping, the improper transportation of a person over state lines, involuntary servitude, which is going on. Many times they will have them commit petty crimes in order to, keep their operation going. Drugs will also be a huge part of this as well, too. And unfortunately, one of the common things with most of our victims that have talked about this, it's usually a Xanax or some other type of drug that the trafficker will keep them continually in this high as they have them in their custody. And then in Mansfield, in our one case that we had too, it was prostitution and the sale of drugs and that. So it's a variety of crimes, but normally involves around sex crimes or around drugs as well.
Okay. Do statistics exist for the occurrence of this type of crime in Lorain County?
Unfortunately, in Lorain County, other than the recent arrest of Mr. Gilbert that was announced by the Lorain County Prosecutor's Office, Stephen Gilbert was indicted on a 54-count indictment, which included human trafficking. There have only been 2 arrests in Lorain County in the last 2013 was the only arrest prior to this. So as far as statistics go for Lorain County, there's not a lot that's statistically recorded because there hasn't been really a large law enforcement presence regarding human trafficking. And when I say that, it's not because law enforcement's not looking for it. 2016 was the last time that any police officer in the state of Ohio was required to have human trafficking training underneath the continuing professional training standards from the Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission. That was 1 hour, Rudy, back in 2016.
Well, that's tough.
Cosmetologists who have a license to cut hair, when they get their license renewed, they're required to have 2 hours every time that they have their license renewed, because Governor Kasich had passed that into law about 7 years ago. And so therefore, every time a cosmetologist goes to get their license renewed, they have to have 2 hours of human trafficking training. We're trying to expand that through the town hall meeting series that we're doing to educate the public so they understand. And it's not just, hey, here's a question and answer session, or we're going to throw statistics out at you. We want you to hear the stories that these victims and survivors have gone through. And as a matter of fact, they call themselves surthrivers, meaning that they have survived and they've gone beyond surviving, that they have actually thrived in their professions. Dr. Marlene Carson, she is on the White House Advisory Council for Human Trafficking. Teresa Merriweather, who actually lives here in Lorain County in Elyria, she's actually on the International Advisory for Human Trafficking and also assisted in advising the UN. And Samantha Floyd, who we had on our panel as well, is actually a consultant to the United States State Department on human trafficking. So they've taken their experiences in an attempt to help others and bring this awareness to the community so the community can look for signs as to what's going on. And that's what we're trying to do, make sure that we spread the awareness.
What resources about trafficking are provided by the Attorney General and Office of Homeland Security, that type of thing?
Actually, the AG's job does a great, or office does a great job in promoting that. They have an entire section on their website dedicated to human trafficking. They have flyers. They have the hotline numbers, where to report certain things, what counties do have task forces. We don't have one in Lorain County right now, but we are enjoying with the Cuyahoga Regional Human Trafficking Task Force that this county works with. And so therefore, the AG's office and the Department of Homeland Security both have phenomenal websites, phenomenal amount of information, training videos, everything else that the public can look for to educate themselves. So if they see something in the public, that they can take action. One of our victims, in a matter of fact, this last summer at Cedar Point, she had noticed. Now, of course, she knows what she's looking for, because she was a victim of human trafficking.
Oh.
Saw a girl in line at one of the roller coaster rides and just kept like pulling away. They kept pulling her back. She didn't have anything on her. And again, she had to take into account, this is an amusement park, who's taking their phone on a ride or, losing something. But she kept watching the body language of this girl. And she's like, something's not right here. So she had actually talked to staff, which they then brought. Cedar Point has their own police department.
Understand.
And so they investigated it, and long story short, Rudy, in the end, the victim was recovered, and her actual trafficker and others were with her at Cedar Point, and the trafficker was wanted. So it's just things like this to bring to the attention of law enforcement of what you see, getting some information, getting yourself educated on what to look for, and we had a recovery at Cedar Point.
Okay, that's wonderful, and I think we'll have that telephone hotline number at the bottom of the screen, and that will be something that folks can use if they notice signs of trafficking
Yes.
in people that they meet.
And it's an easy number to remember. It's just 888-3737, 888. So 888 at the beginning, 3737, and 888 at the end.
Okay, that's great. Oh, what are the characteristics that most traffickers share that allow them to attract and control people, victims?
They do everything that we don't do as parents or friends or family. They show loyalty toward the victim. They show love toward the victim. And so a lot of times it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is, what your ethnical background is. It's something is missing in that child's life, and usually it's being appreciated and loved. And that's what they show these victims, and that's what attracts them. They provide that to them. The whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for humans. It's in that hierarchy that we want to feel wanted. We want to feel that we're appreciated. And when we're not getting it at home, and again, it doesn't matter what neighborhood that you grew up in, what house that you live in, it comes down to is that basic common denominator to all of this is the trafficker will show the appreciation to their victim many times when parents and family will not.
Now, what lessons do we learn from traffickers about traffickers from the trial of the recording artist R. Kelly?
Oh, wow. R. Kelly's trial, as when you look at the crime of human trafficking, especially what R. Kelly did at the level that he did it, is just absolutely a heinous example of when this type of crime is not recognized of where it can lead. The one thing I will say that came out of the R. Kelly trial that was good is that all of a sudden, CBS, the FBI series, for example, they did entire episodes on human trafficking. Law and Order, SVU. Now, I know Dick Wolf is the producer behind many of these, but they focused many shows on human trafficking. With that, and I feel strongly about it, so my campaign, we're doing town hall meetings on human trafficking. Bring the survivors forward so they can tell their story so the public knows what's going on. So prior to the R. Kelly trial, somebody would talk about human trafficking and be, okay, well, I heard about it, but I really am not sure what human trafficking entails. So if there was any good that came out of the R. Kelly trial, it was the awareness to the public, the media attention as to what was going on, in order for the public to start taking notice that this is a big problem and it is such a heinous criminal act.
Okay. Now, you talked a little bit about the signs of trafficking, that individual who's kind of pulling away from the handlers. Are there any other signs that people can pick up?
Yes, and especially we have the busiest travel season coming up for the Thanksgiving holiday. You want to look for, you can tell when you just look at a human being, something's wrong. You can tell when somebody's down. You can tell when they're upset about something. The first thing is to take notice of body language, how people are looking. And then things like if somebody can't make their own purchase, you go to Starbucks or whatever else, somebody doesn't have a wallet. Somebody's got to control all their money. The handler is handling the person's wallet, has their phone. There's no personal effects that this person has. What teenager today do you know that doesn't have their own phone?
Yeah.
Everybody does. So those are signs that you want to be looking for. The constant grabbing of the arm, holding them close, keeping them in tight, but it's not a close relationship because you can tell that there's anxiety there. And here is particular, especially with the holidays coming up, the nail salons, the beauty salons, tattoo parlors. The handlers like to put their victims through what's called a transformation. They have to change their look because now this person is missing. They know that people are out looking for them. So when you see somebody in a beauty shop, and a lot of times you'll have female handlers with female victims go into nail salons because they're trying to lessen the ability to be caught. They're trying to blend into what's going on. But you got to look for that body language. You got to see what's going on. If they don't carry their own cash, they don't have their own phone, they don't have their own wallet. Those are things that you have to look at and look at the interaction. And then remember, call the hotline, 888-373-7888.
Okay.
And, report it. And I would hope in today's day and age, for the minor inconvenience, if it's not a trafficking offense that's going on, have law enforcement take a look at these particular situations because we have a lot of missing people, Rudy, and it's nice if we can get them recovered.
I agree. Now, to change gears a little bit, what are the predominant crimes that are involved with drug abuse?
Okay. So, as we said, human trafficking has a lot of drug abuse, it's affiliated with, but when you're talking about drug abuse on its own, as its own crime, a lot of times in order for people to afford the drugs, you have thefts from your vehicles, burglarizing somebody's house. When you see that going on in the community, those are always statistics that we looked for. When I worked with Cleveland Metroparks, for example, we were probably the largest victim of car break-ins that was going on throughout all of northeastern Ohio. We developed a task force that year, and we traced all of those car break-ins down to a business that was on the east side of Cleveland, operated by two men. And so when we executed the search warrants on that, of course, they were fencing all the property, they were funneling, purchase of drugs, et cetera. And so therefore, you're looking for major theft operations that are going on with that because some type of money has to support the drugs that they're actually buying. Yeah. The biggest, though, Rudy, when you look at that, and it's not more or less a criminal act that's affiliated with it, but what a lot of people don't realize is how drug abuse affects a family. And a lot of times, people who are going to be watching this that have been through addiction recovery with a loved one, they'll know But a lot of times people don't take action soon enough. They think their son or daughter, oh, they're just withdrawn. They're a teenager. They're going through this or they're going through that. And when we have drug addiction, a lot of times we don't want to admit that either our own family's been afflicted by it, but I can sit here and personally tell you today, my family and everybody that I've known has somebody in their family that has had some type of chemical dependency problem that they've needed professional help. So we have things that affect our lives personally because we've had our stuff taken, our car broken into, our house burglarized. But again, what we fail to miss a lot of times, Rudy, is the fact that there are relationships that go on in families that a lot of times are damaged heavily by drug abuse as well too. And we just want to make sure that the appropriate steps and actions are taken, that those families get the proper resources in the right amount of time in order to make sure that we don't have the family relationship torn apart by drug abuse.
What would be the effect of legalizing drugs of abuse, like narcotics or cocaine? What do you think would happen?
My opinion on that is that we have hotlines for alcoholism. Gambling is legalized in the state of Ohio. We have hotlines for that. My opinion, Rudy, is that we're going to have some people that are going to be able to handle it, and we're going to have many that are not going to be able to handle it. And so I think if we look at some other states where things have been legalized, Colorado, for example, for recreational marijuana use, we have to look at the amount of money that it has cost society as far as rehabilitation cost, criminology costs, things like that have gone on. So, I mean, I can't really say unless we see it actually take place here in Ohio, but if we look at other states that have allowed this to happen, it's been a bigger cost to society.
Understand. To switch gears again on you, tell us the difference between police reform and defunding the police.
One of my favorite topics lately. Defunding the police, I think if you look at Portland just this last week, they tried an experiment in Oregon in regarding defunding the police, and now they're looking at going back to council and say we need to refund the police because things have gotten a little out of hand out there.
Dangerous experiment.
Exactly. I don't think you can ever defund the police. And as a matter of fact, this is my 31st year in law enforcement. Over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen, actually since 2000, we've seen a decrease in police funding. And what happens with police funding? We have to keep cops on the road. We have to have that presence. What's one of the first things to go? Training, specialized support services, things that we serve our community in the best way that we can. So therefore, when we talk about defunding the police, that's something that I don't think we could ever do because the police are an integral part of society. And we could go back and talk about social contract theory, the whole 9 yards, which is not what this show is all about, but the police will always be there. When we talk about police reform, this is the interesting aspect and where we can make a change. And this all goes back to a simple concept of community policing that was from the 1970s that we started. And what's happening today is that in order to have police reform, we also have to have community reform. And in order to have community reform, people are going to ask, well, whose responsibility is that? Well, the only common denominator that we have on all of this is the government and the police, who represent the enforcement of the government. So programs that need to be put into place in regard to simple things such as being stopped on a traffic stop. I had a pastor in Elyria just tell me last month, he said, we know that we train the police to de-escalate situations. He goes, when do we do training with the community to also be involved with de-escalating situations? So those are things that we need to look at from a police community relations standpoint. First of all, we have to find the base level of where we're all going to trust each other. Now, I want to live in a safe community. Rudy, I know that you want to live in a safe community. I'm in law enforcement, you're not in law enforcement, but we both have two goals. You want to live in a safe community, and I want to make sure that you live in a safe community. We start there because that's our common ground, is wanting that safe community. And so then the next step is, how do we base and begin building the trust off of that base to move up and forward from there? So when we talk about police reform, my idea of police reform and being involved in the committees throughout the state of Ohio that I am right now, there are some things that we're not getting rid of the police, we're not defunding the police, but we have to focus on efforts of how do we improve our relationship with the community? How do we build trust? Now, we could look at Avon Lake, for example. If we did a poll, there is probably a high level of trust from the community with its police department. There's probably going to be some situations. I know when I worked here, we had certain families in town that was like, well, I don't care for the police because we had a lot of involvement in their lives. So there's going to be some aspects. You're going to have a few one-offs that we don't like the police, just simply because of their interaction with the police department. You have other communities that don't have, as a whole wide community, faith or trust in the police. So we got to look at those situations on how do we build those relationships and how do we come together and how do we come to the common
More
ground.
personal interaction, that kind of thing.
Not only personal interaction, but when we go through training, just like the pastor asked me in Elyria, how do we teach the community to de-escalate as well too? We should also take that money that's going toward police training, and we also involve community involvement in that as well. Because so many times we may not like each other, but we keep going to the same meetings, we keep seeing each other over multiple times. All of a sudden now, all right, I know he just wants me to have a safe community. I didn't like what he did in the past, but now that I'm meeting with him every couple of weeks, I'm beginning to get a sense of understanding. Let's get the respect issue cleared out of the way first and start respecting each other and build on top of that. And the more community interaction that we have, and the more understanding of what police are to do in communities, the more the public's going to understand, just like the town hall meeting series that we've talked about. Why do we bring these victim stories out there? We could have, Rudy, a meeting where we just pass out pamphlets and hand out information. But as we've all seen over the course of the last several years, especially with the advent of social media, there are narratives that can be construed either on this end of the spectrum, can be misconstrued on this end of the spectrum, and now we develop camps as to what we believe in. And so therefore, if we actually have the people who've experienced this come out and they meet with law enforcement, and law enforcement is the proprietor of these events to make them happen, that's what starts building on that community foundation of trust. And that's where we start our police reform. It's not that we have to take bulletproof vest away. It's not that we have to change the appearance of the police. It's how we interact with each other.
Understand. What would be the result of removing qualified immunity litigation protection from police officers? That's one of the things that you hear about.
I think it would be enormously detrimental to police. A lot of things that happen on a daily basis, police have to react to things in a split-second decision. And a lot of times when we go back what I just said about bringing the community into those trainings, at Tri-C, for example, we have a simulator that we have situations that come up in which police are placed in shoot, don't shoot, what type of use of force. When we stick the layperson, mayors, city council people, church leaders into those same type of situations, they react very poorly because they've had no training in those situations. So the more training that we have, and the more that we can react and the more that we can bring the community in so that they understand what the police officer is going through at that point in time, they'll understand what the need for qualified immunity is, because we're not always going to be perfect in what we do. Now, the other thing that bothers me about qualified immunity is that in Congress, we have a bill that's before Congress right now, and part of that bill is to eliminate qualified immunity. That bill is called the George Floyd Act. In George Floyd's situation, and this is in my opinion with years of study with constitutional law, that would have never applied. Those officers, I think in that case, wouldn't have even been granted qualified immunity because they acted so far outside the scope and color of their office that we're trying to name a bill to eliminate qualified immunity after a man that in that situation, qualified immunity would have never been given to those officers, because it's not absolute, Rudy. Qualified immunity means is that a court had found that the officer acted within the scope of their duty. If that officer acts outside the color of their office, they don't get qualified immunity. And so therefore, there's a balancing test to find out, do they have it or not? So it's a hot topic right now, and if you take qualified immunity away, you're going to see a backlog of lawsuits in the courts, things that are happening, and then I think a lot like you're going to see now too, people aren't going to show up for even test to be a police officer. The last test in Cleveland, for example, they had 300 officers show up. Brunswick gave a test not too long ago in Medina County, and they had less than 50 show up for a police test in there. So attracting qualified, intelligent candidates to this profession is becoming harder and harder to do because all they have to do is watch the news and look at themselves and say, do I want to get involved in that? To an officer I just recently hired for my afternoon shift. He worked for the railroad for years. He's in his late 30s, saw the shootings that had happened in Dallas of the assassination of the police officers down there, and that's when he decided that he was going to sign up for the police academy and he was going to make a difference. He said, I want to get involved in that. I want to be able to make a difference. So when we talk about police reform, Rudy, that's the type of situations that we have to have. Those are the situations that we as police have to create for our community. And then in addition to that, we have to attract the right type of people that want to do this job and do it for the right reasons.
What do you think of the zero bail programs that are active in some cities?
Well, I call myself a constitutionalist, and bail is required by the United States Constitution. So when I look at zero bail, I look at those situations as, well, it's a violation of the United States Constitution, and I am not for anything that violates the Constitution. There are situations, of course, that require high bail. There are situations that require a subject to be held until law enforcement can adequately and thoroughly look into it, but I don't think you can ever have a zero bail situation. And in addition to that, I think also when you talk the zero, I'm going to throw another zero term out to you, zero tolerance. We, or at least I, like to make sure that deputies and officers have the right to be able to make a decision. When we talked earlier about that, building that level of community trust and starting off with a safe community, every time a case goes to court, Rudy, we wouldn't have courts if everything was like, okay, you violated this law, it goes into this law, and so therefore this is your punishment. There are circumstances around everything that happens in life, and every situation is
a little more
different.
complicated, yeah.
It's way more complicated than having, hey, we're going to have zero tolerance. Then you're also meaning that you're taking discretion away from the officer to be able to work that problem out with the community member and say, okay, where do we take this from here? Perfect example, we'll go back to human trafficking. We could have a drug case with prostitution like we had in Mansfield not too long ago. Is it actually drugs and prostitution, or was there something else that this person was a victim of human trafficking? If we had zero tolerance, that victim would have never been recovered because she would have been treated just as every other person selling drugs and engaging in prostitution, and the officer wouldn't have had that discretion to get the appropriate people involved to be able to rescue her.
Understand. You mentioned zero tolerance, and I think of that in terms of the broken windows policy that some jurisdictions have used to capture criminals. In other words, to have enforcement of minor laws that bring in criminals into the system. Minor laws being like having a broken taillight, that kind of thing, and being able to capture criminals because they had broken taillights. Employing that kind of approach. What do you think about that?
Broken windows, unfortunately, has been misconstrued over the course of the last several years, and unfortunately, I see a pendulum swing going in the opposite direction. That even the legislature right now is saying, let's get rid of minor traffic infractions, because police are using minor traffic infractions to harass the public. Well, there's a reason why brake lights have to be operating. There's a reason why there's two headlights on the car. There's a reason for all this and why it was made a law. Broken windows originally, when the theory was developed, was that it was a community policing standard in which the police were supposed to help the community fix the broken window instead of citing the community for the broken window. So therefore, if you look at things like minor traffic infractions and things like that, there is an idea that I had, and was through our JVS program as well too, that I would love to employ a sheriff as we could put this together, is that minor infraction goes to a student program, somebody that's helping the community. And so therefore, we get the kids with the car at the JVS, that minor infraction can be fixed. We have a deputy that works JVS anyway as a school resource officer. The person has so many days to take it there, get it fixed for nearly free or no cost. The deputy can sign off that their violation correction order was fixed. And hey, after so many days, if they failed on their own to get free help from a community resource that would be the joint vocational school, I don't think you're going to have anyone in society at that point looking at it and saying, well, you got the ticket, but you had 45 days to get it fixed, and they were going to do it for you for free. So broken windows, we now have to start looking at what are our community resources that we have to, again, build those trust and foundations and relationships between the schools and the communities, et cetera. And do we have to cite for it? That goes back to zero tolerance. Does the deputy have discretion or the officer have discretion to do something maybe in a more positive sense, that we can utilize too? So serious offenses, no. Minor offenses such as that, you talk about broken windows, I think it's been misconstrued over the years, and we have ways to get that back on track to what the original concept was.
Okay, it builds trust. That sounds like a good approach. What accounts for the major crime increases that we're seeing in some cities?
This is going to sound ad nauseum coming from me, but it's the lack of trust from the community and the police department. We have a situation which a charter amendment in the city of Cleveland was just passed to put complete civilian oversight of the police department in the city of Cleveland. That charter amendment, in my opinion, won because there was a lack of trust between the community of Cleveland and their police department. So now there's going to be oversight of that. Rudy, that would be like me walking into a surgical suite, and now I'm on some surgical oversight board that I'm going to tell a surgeon, hey, you may not want to use that much gauze, or I don't like that clamp that's being used in your surgical procedure. You're going to have non-law enforcement professionals attempting to regulate and oversee law enforcement. And in my opinion, I think that's going to have disastrous results that are going to come from this. So when you have that lack of trust between the community and the police, and especially in larger cities, that is what has created the foundation of increasing the crime rate in those cities over the course of the last several years.
Mm-hmm. Now, in Ohio, if you have a police officer involved in a use of force incident, how is that handled? I'm presuming it's typically reviewed to see if that action met the standard of police enforcement.
Well, there is a organization called the Ohio Collaborative, and unfortunately right now, until it's legislated, it's a voluntary compliance standard to be a part of. My department's a part of it. Many departments are a part of it. And the standard that you're talking about regarding use of force has a review, not only by the chief, but has a review by a use of force committee that is assigned to that as well, which again is made up of other law enforcement officers outside of the officer's jurisdiction, attorneys that are involved in that to take a look at that use of force situation that happens. So that's if your department voluntarily belongs to the Ohio Collaborative right now. The current legislation which is going through the state of Ohio right now, that would be mandated for every department to be a member of that, to include there would be a database that would be created that every use of force situation would be entered into this database. I know there have been a lot of officers out there who said, oh, well, now we're going to have this database created, but what we need to realize, everything we do, Rudy, is public. It's in the public eye. It's in the public record. The public has access to all of our reports, investigations in this already. And part of me that just really aggravates me as a police chief, we're hiring a new officer. An officer comes to us and they look great in an interview situation. And I call that officer's prior department and I said, hey, what about Joe Smith? How was he as an officer with your department? All I can tell you, Chief, is that he worked here from January 16th of 2004 until November 8th of 2020. Well, can't you tell me anything else about him? No. And it's like, we don't share this information. So if that officer was not a good officer in that community, we may bring him in as a bad officer in our community. Fortunately, if we're a tight-knit community, a lot of people are like, oh, I wouldn't hire that guy because he's had these issues, blah, blah, blah. We do the most thorough background check that we could possibly do to make sure that that does not happen.
Okay.
But we still have this, that the chiefs themselves and sheriffs are afraid to be sued, that the standard answer is, well, he worked here or she worked here from this day to that day, and Chief, that's all I can tell you. And we do need to have a database accountability because every department wants to have the best officers. Avon Lake, they just won the shooting competition that they had for the virtual range.
Okay.
And, this hearty competition between Avon Lake, other departments in the county, everybody wants to be the best. There's not a police department out there, Rudy, that says, hey, we're striving to be the worst police department that's out there. Everybody wants to be the best. But we have to make sure that we give the communities the resources to be hiring the best officers that they can hire.
Okay, that database sounds like a really intelligent way to go.
As long as, if any program, as long as it's done correctly.
Understand. Well, thank you very much, Chief. Thank you for your service. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, our email addresses will appear at the bottom of the screen. Please let us know if you'd like to appear on the show. If you know interesting people that would like to appear, certainly send us their contact information. And remember that seatbelts save lives. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.